And we're joined now from Montreal by the CJN's Quebec correspondent, Joel Chaushu. Welcome back to North Star. Good to see you.
Salut, Alan. Happy to be here.
Good to have you. There's a lot to catch up on in terms of the developments, both in Quebec in terms of secularism and anti-Semitism and safety in the streets, as well as the recent Quebec municipal elections. But we should start with the most recent breaking news, which is about the doubling down of Quebec's efforts to go secular, laïcité. So can
Yep.
you bring us up to speed on what you've heard is coming down the pipeline this week in terms of a ban on religion in other parts of public life?
Right. So yes, you are correct. This is the triple down. This is laïcité 3.0. The Quebec government is expected to table legislation this week. It will be its third piece of secularism legislation. Most listeners and viewers and readers of the CJN might be familiar with Bill 21, which was passed in 2019. That placed a prohibition on ostentatious religious symbols being worn by certain government employees, including teachers, judges, police officers, effectively banning kippas, turbans, and hijabs. Bill 94, which was given assent earlier this year, extended that ban throughout the entire school system, throughout the entire public education network, extending to cafeteria workers, parent volunteers, daycare personnel, janitors. So that was quite thorough. It also imposed a ban on face coverings in the elementary and high school network, as well as banning the use of school property for religious purposes, meaning facilities couldn't be rented out in evenings and weekends for religious purposes by local mosques, churches, or synagogues. And the Quebec government was very clear that there was more coming. And what we're going to see happen tomorrow, Wednesday or Thursday. Sorry, I don't know when this is coming.
That's fine. Yeah.
The next piece is effectively gonna take it all even further. Now, what we're expecting to see is a total ban on face coverings from daycare through to university. That means no niqabs or burqas. Now, I don't know how big an issue burqas are in the education system. Although niqabs you can see in Montreal, and you can see them here in Cote Saint-Luc as well. So that will not be allowed on school property. The
By
government
staff, and we're not talking about parents picking people up or what have you.
by anybody, parents coming in will not be allowed to have a face covering.
Or
That's
kippa
according.
or
Yeah.
any of that stuff. Yeah.
cor- No,
Or
no,
Star of David,
not the keeper, the face covering.
the
It's the
face
face
covering.
covering. That's being banned. What's also going to be banned are halal only food menus for daycares, the subsidized daycares, so that toddlers have a choice in what they're eating. The government is doing away with the practice of allowing government subsidized daycares to have strictly halal menus. As well, another ban on using the property, prayer rooms in colleges and universities, verboten out. That's a very a big issue in Montreal, particularly in the English cégeps in Vanier and Dawson. As you know, the Quebec government launched an investigation into the goings-on in Vanier and Dawson, what the former education minister described as a toxic and explosive climate, all surrounding the Gaza-Israel war. And prayer rooms was a bone of contention as well.
Okay,
Now,
let's just pause for 1 second
yeah,
because there's a lot to take in. I wanna make
sure,
sure I
sure.
understand.
There's
You're
more.
talking there's more.
Yeah.
This sounds like it was all, more secularism, but with a sort of veiled, and I'm not using that as a pun, um, uh, targeting of a certain population. But tell me how this would have also impacted Canadians who are Jewish, visibly Jewish.
Well, I don't know how much it will. There are rooms in universities and cégeps where Hillel students gather, and if they want to have a Shabbat event, does that necessarily constitute a religious event or a prayer room? So a lot of these finer details will have to be worked out, and I haven't seen the legislation yet. But we do know that along with some of the restrictions on accommodating holidays that may affect Jewish staff in the public school system. There are no accommodations for absences for religious holidays for students either. Now, that's an important element because the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, CIJA, had proposed to the government that they offer a blanket 10-day religious holiday accommodation, provided that parents provide those calendar dates by the first day of the school year to the school staff.
Which would be easy to do because we already know.
Sure, but the government said no, and they're also doing away with accommodation for staff as well, apart from those already included in the respective collective agreements by staff. Now, we know that schools and principals can be very flexible and creative in how they schedule assessments, exams, and homework, so I don't think there's much concern about that. As for the continued prohibition of religious symbols on staff. How big an issue that is for observant Jews, I don't know. I don't know how many observant Jews are planning to apply to work in the public school system, because remember, staff who are already, there's a grandfather clause for both Bill 21 going back to 2019 and for Bill 94 going back to earlier this year. So people can,
It'll only affect new hires or promotions
So
job
that there's the
transfer.
rub. If you're somebody wearing a hijab or a kippah and you want to go from teacher to vice principal, you can't do it if you're going to keep wearing your kippah. Again, we're going to see how the school boards and the school service centers react. And remember that the English school boards have far more independence because they're a constitutionally protected language minority, and they have control over their school boards, as opposed to the English community has more control over its school boards. And that's where most of the public school Jewish students are going. The French school service centers were formerly boards abolished by the provincial government and transformed into school centers, which are far more dependent on the whims and the will of the Quebec government. So we're going to see how that plays.
We got to wait and see, as you said. But what about public street prayers?
Correct. So
this is a huge thing in Quebec,
Yeah.
as it is in many parts of Canada. How will the government of Quebec? What is it doing to crack down on these prayers outside churches and on the streets and what have you?
Well, what they're doing is they are actually following the lead of their own, the Pelchat-Rousseau Commission report, which came out a couple of months ago, which is their own government commission on secularism, which determined that street prayers, while it's an issue, it's not an urgent issue to deal with. However, it did suggest that this be foisted upon municipalities to deal with. That's something that was echoed by former Cote Saint-Luc councillor who recently retired, Dita Burku. She presented that as part of a plan to the city of Montreal, trying to get that on the debate during the last municipal election, and they said no, thank you. They didn't want to discuss it. But she had argued, as many people did, that municipalities are best placed to make those determinations, to issue permits, whether it be for a Lag Bomer parade or for a native festival
or some religious thing,
or a Stations of the Cross, so that everybody, vivre ensemble is a big word in Quebec. Let's live well together. Let's get along. But that has to be worked at. And currently there are municipalities that issue permits for religious events in order to maintain control on the size and the scope of them so that they don't take over public spaces. The issue is a big one in Quebec. It's come to light over the last few months as more of these raucous, disruptive demonstrations we see downtown, these anti-Israel demonstrations, take a brief pause for street prayer, where anything from 12 to 60 people, get down on the street, often blocking traffic or sidewalks, under the guise and protection of Montreal police. And that has led to counter protests, particularly in front of the Notre Dame Basilica, which is probably the most identifiable symbol of Quebec's Catholic heritage. So people are saying this is not a coincidence. This is about imposing a presence or trying to intimidate. Not all agree, but enough agree that there have been some pretty serious and determined counter protests and efforts to get this on the public agenda. The government has never been happy with these incidents and said it was going to act. It promised it would act. And this is how it's going to act, by handing it down to municipalities. And it does make sense because, a town like Cote Saint-Luc, which has 50-something% Jews amongst its 37,000 plus population, has different considerations over public religious displays than, let's say, Ville Saint-Laurent, which has a very heavy Muslim population. So each municipality is going to have to determine best what they're going to do in keeping with the government mandate. Now, I do want to mention one thing. There was a fourth law that was passed that not too many people talk about or in the rest of Canada heard about, and that's Quebec's Bill 84, which was passed this summer. Bill 84 is an integration law, which is a tacit rejection of Canadian multiculturalism, both in practice and in policy. And it aims for national integration with three values at its core, three targets: secularism, gender equality, and French. Three values to unite all Quebecers and to use as a model to integrate newcomers. And that, along with the three new secularism bills, and along with changes we're expecting to see to the Quebec Education Code to accommodate those values, is going to put Quebec in a very distinct place.
Okay, I'm not understanding something. When we're talking
Yes.
about the street protests,
Yes.
so they're now outlawed, but
No.
it's up to, so how do these new
So the
laws
Quebec.
cover this?
So currently, a lot of the you
Public
said
prayer.
a lot of the public prayer events that are happening, when they're happening in the street, they currently violate a number of municipal bylaws and the Quebec Highway Safety Code, and they're not, those laws are not being enforced. So the government is going to ban public prayer from streets, public spaces, including parks, unless the group has a municipal permit. Now, it's not clear what that means for a Christian group having a picnic in a park and everybody stands up to simultaneously recite a
Say
prayer,
grace or whatever it is, yeah.
or to do tashlik at the park, as Jewish communities often do, throwing crumbs into the water.
Or what about menorahs for Hanukkah?
Correct.
Big one.
So this will be
Those are
up to
usually municipally sanctioned, though, so.
Correct. Like, I mean, we've had examples like the town of Mount Royal banning menorahs but keeping a holiday tree. So these are things that arguably are best left to municipalities, and that's what the Quebec government is doing. It is saying they're going to be banned unless municipal authorities grant a permit. So they're pushing off that responsibility and imposing that responsibility at the same time.
Okay, just before we pivot to the municipal elections, I still need to understand the timing of these new secularism.
Sure. Well,
Why are they doing this so quickly now?
right.
Quick, all in the last few months.
Well, let's be clear. None of this is a surprise. The government's been talking about this for years. After the last round of legislation was passed, there were questions about why they didn't go far enough and what was coming. But you see the intent and the activity on this legislation rising while the government's popularity is plummeting in the polls. The current provincial government under Premier François Legault, the Coalition Avenir Québec, better known as the CAQ, who hold 80 plus seats in I think it's 120 something seat assembly, is doing very poorly in the polls. And if there was an election held today, it might make third or fourth place, with the Parti Québécois sailing in the polls, expected to win some 70 seats, with clearly a third of decided voters. Now, the Parti Québécois, which currently has 6 seats, is really soaring in popularity, and it would like to go even farther. It would like to see bans on students wearing religious symbols. So the CAQ, clearly in free fall. It's got a crisis going with its doctors. It's got a crisis going with the poor investments by the government's investment arm. And the Liberals are also imploding as well under a lot of dysfunction with their new leader, Pablo Rodriguez. Therefore, every effort to reframe the public debate into something motivated voters can sink their teeth in seems like gold to the governing CAQ, and the PQ's happy to play along.
So what does this have to do with October 7th and the explosion of street protests?
Sure.
And also, for example, in the education sector, the scandal that you reported about, which found that some of the teachers in a certain school and others who were from the Middle East started to use their own freelancing, they deviated from the official curriculum.
You're referring to l'affaire Bedford, the Bedford affair. That referred to an elementary school in Cote Saint-Luc, which is, I believe, not apart from maybe one neighborhood in Toronto, is probably the most diverse neighborhood, municipal jurisdiction in Canada. It's a population of 170,000 people in this borough. It's the most populous in Montreal. But in Cote Saint-Luc, in the heart of Cote Saint-Luc, a few blocks from where I'm sitting right now, Bedford School, it was revealed by the Liberal Party that there was a serious dysfunction that began with sectarian factionalism within the staff, between groups of Middle Eastern teachers and North African teachers, all Muslims, and complaints about staff not speaking French to each other. Now, that's a very sensitive thing in Quebec. You know, people not speaking the official language on school property.
In a
A
public
hundred,
sector.
a hundred
Oh,
percent.
yeah.
And it soon became known that there was a report. There were reports of teachers praying in classrooms, of uh, of students being told that certain sports were not for girls, of the mandatory sex ed curriculum in Quebec not being taught in some classes, and even suggestions of alleged interference by a local mosque in some of the activities at the school or on school outings. Now, this outraged Monsieur, Madame, tout le monde. It flew hard and hot on radio shows and on social media. There was discussion of it in the National Assembly, and the government appointed an investigator to investigate what was going on and found that the problem was a little bit more widespread, and ended up investigating 17 public schools in Quebec, including high schools in Laval, some daycares, and found that this was an issue in a couple of them. And that, to a degree, to be fair, a large part of it was just a lack of will on the part of management, of school administrators, to do anything about it, feeling cowed or bullied by staff and by the community. So this was a very delicate topic. But again, I'll repeat what I've said for a long time, and was repeated by former Israel Consul General Paul Hirschon recently, is that one of the fascinating things about Quebec is that it's always having an honest conversation with itself about identity, about self-image, about the future, about culture, about language, about how you want your grandchildren to live, what language they should speak. So they're not afraid to have these conversations. They're uncomfortable for some, but it's part of living here. So again, there were 11 teachers suspended. The government said it's going to respond with changes to the Education Act that include mandatory teacher training, professional standards, reviews, assessments of school curriculums at the beginning of the school year and at any time during the year, more interference in the school milieu, and other measures like we're seeing in Bill 94 and the as yet to be named legislation that the government's hinting at coming out the next 48 hours.
But
But
in terms of the laws, though, I mean, what did this is more important to me in terms of what the leaders of the Jewish community are saying. Is
so
this going to be good for the Jewish community because it takes all religion out? Is it
So
safer for Jews?
there was support from members of the Jewish community. CJA supported elements of Bill 94. They thought it was a good idea, and it would lead to some better dialogue amongst communities. There are a lot of Jews who feel that freedom from religion in the public space provides freedom for religion. Nobody should feel intimidated or ashamed or hesitant to practice their own or identify themselves, or how they express themselves, for fear of offending or being targeted by others. So some of these events are quite disturbing to people, particularly the ones downtown. Now, remember, these are coming also in under the guise of free speech and protests, which have turned many areas of downtown Montreal into no-go zones for a lot of people, where streets are blocked for hours, raucous, loud smoke bombs, genocidal chants, no ambiguity about that, and police giving a free pass to what I would say safely are thousands of criminal code infractions over the last 2 years. And that's what led a lot of Montreal Jews to dub Montreal police as the highest paid school crossing guards in Canada. So this is an issue. This is an issue that some people tried to get on the agenda in the last municipal elections on November 2nd across Quebec, but notably here on the island of Montreal, with very little luck. But there has been a big shift in culture and in power as of November 2nd, because
Well, let's talk about that. Valerie Plante did not run again.
nope.
Most people in the Jewish community are happy to see the end of her. I
Yeah,
would say that would be the understatement of the
that's
year.
very polite characterization, Ellen.
Tell us about the new mayor and whether she is someone that the Jewish community thinks will be tougher on anti-Semitism,
So
on protests, someone they can work with.
So it seems the Jewish community has held out high hopes for Soraya Martinez Ferrada, a former minister in the Trudeau government, and before that she was a city councillor in Saint Michel that I covered for another publication, not to be named, many years ago. She was a competent city councillor. She speaks often about her experiences as a refugee coming from a pretty brutal regime in Chile. But she came here as a child, and she says that's marked her path and her journey. So yes, the Jewish community has held out high hopes for her. Now, here's the thing: um, most of the Jewish community on the island of Montreal does not live in the city of Montreal proper. That means in Cote Saint-Luc or Hampstead or Westmount or Dollar-des-Ormeaux. So they don't vote for the mayor of Montreal. But the
But
mayor of
they
Montreal.
live there, they travel
Correct.
there, they
You
go to
absolutely
synagogue there,
exactly
their kids go to
100%. Cote
university
Saint-Luc
there.
butts up against Cote
Exactly.
100%. Now, the issue is that the Montreal administration controls the agglomeration, which is the grouping of all island communities, the 19 boroughs of the city of Montreal, as well as the 14 independent municipalities on the island of Montreal, like Cote Saint-Luc, Hampstead, Westmount, Town of Mount Royal, Dollar-des-Ormeaux. So that council governs shared services like police, fire, water, and transit. So if Cote Saint-Luc wants a change in the policing practices, it has to go to the Aglo, where by design, the independent municipalities are at a disadvantage. We can thank the last Liberal government for that. Now, that's what's presented a real problem, because we've seen since October 8th, 2023, we've seen Montreal police clearly approach some of and I'm not talking about peaceful protests. We're talking about raucous protests with vile language being spewed, with clear efforts to intimidate and obstruct, handling it all with a white-gloved approach, preferring to maintain order than enforce the law. Now,
Yeah,
what that
that's the
means,
same thing here too, so.
what that means is that if 40 masked, demonstrators decide to block a road, which is criminal mischief, police, and if they're masked and they're making a lot of noise, those are two other infractions of Canada's criminal code. Instead of police arresting them or schlepping them, pulling them by their masks or by their hair off the street, what they're choosing to do is create
Contain
a corridor for people to
contain.
pass
Yeah.
and say, okay, now everybody's accommodated. Well, that hasn't sufficed for many in the Jewish community, because what it has turned into is asking Jews to withdraw from public spaces for their own good. We've seen too many examples of that. And so what a lot of Jewish community leaders and municipal leaders from the Jewish areas of, quote unquote, of Montreal, Hampstead, Cote Saint-Luc, were asking for clear shifts in policy, more aggressive policing, making full use of the tools available to them, i.e. the Criminal Code of Canada and municipal bylaws. The outgoing government of Projet Montréal under the new leader, Luc Rabouin, wanted nothing to do with it. They didn't want to talk about it. And in fact, of the 400 plus candidates running for seats in the last election, 110 signed an anti-Israel pledge, an anti-apartheid pledge that would see complete severance with Israel
It's
in
a
all
BDS
ways.
pledge, yeah,
A
basically.
BDS, including art, sports, culture, academic, fast-tracking Palestinian refugee claims, increasing services for immigrants from Gaza, and a complete shutdown of all relations with Israel. Out of that 110 who signed, it was mostly from the two progressive parties, Projet Montréal and Transition Montreal, which listeners might recall. Transition Montreal was founded by City Councillor Craig Sauvé, who ran earlier this year in a federal by-election for the NDP, using materials brandishing a Palestinian flag,
Only.
which he got a lot of criticism for. He lost that too.
So he's back on council? No.
He's not back on council. Neither is the leader of the former administration. So they were kind of they lost pretty badly. The new party in power, Ensemble Montréal, with Soraya Martinez Ferrada, holds out some good promise for the Jewish community in that in the largest borough, Côte-Neige Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, the new mayor is Stephanie Valenzuela, the first Filipina mayor in Quebec, who is a staunch ally of the Jewish community. She formerly represented the district of Darlington, home to a lot of Orthodox Jews in Montreal, and she sits on council with her colleague Sonny Morose, the city's only Jewish city councillor in Snowdon. So, and this is where the home to the Jewish campus, and where some of the shootings of the schools have taken place, and the rioting around the community center. So there is hope. Efforts by the city of Cote Saint-Luc to get their plan for boosting security in the community were rebuffed. Maybe the new mayor who recently won that election will try to reintroduce that at the Aglo. That's a wait and see.
All right, we'll talk about that quickly.
Sure.
David Torgman, new era in Cote Saint-Luc municipal politics.
Certainly.
Very interesting, controversial, all eyes on Cote Saint-Luc, which is the third largest municipality on the island. A very heavily Jewish riding, as you said, 52% is Jewish. So how come the mayor won by a vote and then lost by 50 votes? How did that happen?
I'll give you a nickel tour. So
very quick timeline.
On Sunday, November 2nd, as the votes were counted, the election workers called into the headquarters at City Hall the numbers. And by the time those numbers were finished being reported by phone by election workers, it seemed that the incumbent Mitch Brownstein, who had just completed 2 terms as mayor over 9 years, before serving previously for 25 years as a city councillor, he was ahead by 50 votes. Now that got a lot of tongues wagging. 50 votes, maybe there's room for a recount there. But the next morning, when the official tallies, the tally sheets that the workers filled out on paper, when those were calculated, it seemed that the challenger, David Torgman, was ahead by 1 vote, which suggested problems with phone calls, problems with addition, problems with data entry. In any case, it indicated a lot of problems. So under Quebec law, a recount can only be granted if a judge approves a request for one, and I believe if there's a tie. So Mitch Brownstein waited a few days and decided to request a recount, which was granted on Thursday, November 13th. On the 14th, they began to recount every single ballot, about 8,600 ballots in 77 boxes that were schlepped from Cote Saint-Luc City Hall down to the Palais de Justice, under the watchful eyes of about 50 people, including a lot of lawyers. They counted them one at a time, and they came up with a new number that Torgman was now 6 votes ahead. That had to end early because many of the people working, including one of the candidates, was Shomer Shabbos, was a Shabbat observant. They had to end that early and pick it up again Monday when they discovered another box hadn't been added to the tally. In all, it was determined that David Torgman was ahead by 7 votes. At that point, Mitch Brownstein conceded, and reportedly with a very gracious embrace of his opponent, which not a lot of people expected to see. And so a new era begins in Cote Saint-Luc, which began last night, Monday night, with its first council meeting of the new mandate, which featured an observant Sephardi engineer as mayor, after Cote Saint-Luc's been governed for the better part of the last 20 years by Anglo-Ashkenazi lawyers with strong liberal connections. That would be Mitch Brownstein and current Mount Royal MP Anthony Housefather. And Mitch Brownstein tried to distance himself from his liberal connections a few weeks ago by resigning as the president of the Liberal EDA in Mount Royal, the Riding Association. And that came a few weeks after Cote Saint-Luc Council unanimously denounced the Mark Carney's government and Mark Carney for recognition of Palestinian statehood. Now, that's something unheard of, the Cote Saint-Luc Council denouncing anything of a liberal government. And in a very candid statement, Brownstein told me he didn't want to be seen as that guy anymore. He had to be the mayor of everybody, and he couldn't allow that to overshadow what his message was, which was to be a unifying mayor on behalf of all Cote Saint-Luc residents. For some, it wasn't enough. It seems that Torgman pulled in some of Brownstein's traditional supporters who were fed up with the liberal affiliations. Some people stayed home, And Torgman was able to pull more votes from his base from when he ran in 2021, when he lost by about 2,200 votes. But all that to say, with everything that's at stake, this still only represented 37% turnout for
Right.
the mayoralty election, which is, I don't know how it is in the rest of the country, but it's kind of the going rate for Quebec
Calgary's
municipalities.
recent election was 39.04% turnout, the lowest in nearly 2
Where
decades.
was that?
Calgary, just
Really,
recently when
39%.
Jeremy Farkas came in, and Toronto in 2022, 29.7% elected Olivia
Yeah,
Chow,
yeah,
down from when Rob Ford ran, and that was in the 50%. So,
right.
I mean, the fewer people are even caring. I heard some people say, "Well, we thought Brownson was a shoo-in, so why
Sure,
bother?"
sure.
But it's a change in culture. The new guy is younger. He's a Sephardic. He's also a Canadian Armed Forces veteran.
Yeah,
Uh, is
he has a broad world view. He worked after the devastating earthquakes in Haiti. He worked
he's
in
an
Haiti for 2 years
engineer.
as
He
a
knows about
UN
public
project
works.
manager. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, he's and he tools around Cote Saint-Luc on his fancy motorcycle. But there are some serious pressing issues for Cote Saint-Luc. Not many have to do with being Jewish or not. One of them, perhaps, is the issue of the Stiebels, the unofficial synagogues and homes. This has been a festering issue for many years, and it's very divisive.
Right, because
And some of the
it annoys people because of all the parking that and the turning,
yeah, and
the hard
also
to
it's
turn
because
lanes in
yeah,
at
but it
certain
also
times of the
annoys
day.
people because the municipal government, the administration didn't do anything about it for so many years. I mean, I believe one of these has been around for decades. So they're grandfathering in permits and they're creating new zones, trying to mitigate this. But there was also a very divisive issue over a new synagogue, a community center. The rhetoric was like off the charts. When Jews fighting amongst Jews. And Torgman was trying to be a voice of reason and all that, and he didn't really engage in anything bombastic. Although he was unfairly targeted in a lot of that. But what's interesting to see is when you looked on the council meeting last night, you saw the center three members on this 9-member council all wearing kippas. So that was something that you don't usually see in Cote Saint-Luc. In neighboring Hampstead,
I
Jeremy
was gonna
Levi.
say, there is a kippah wearing, mayor
He
in
also
Hampstead too.
won re-election by a couple of dozen votes, but there was some taste for change because his challenger Jack Edery almost pulled it off, and there was a third candidate, the former mayor Bill Steinberg, who just keeps on ticking and he keeps going at it, and he has a plan, but people weren't buying into it. And so Jeremy's back, as your listeners may know. Jeremy Levi is a controversial figure. He's
Yeah, we've
very
had him. You've
outspoken on
spoken to him.
anti-Semitism and on the liberal
Pro-Israel,
government and Gaza.
anti-Semitism.
Sure, he's been dinged by many critics, and he welcomes it all. He takes it as a badge of honor.
Except that he has to face sort of a disciplinary hearing by his charter accountant
Yeah, this is an odd one.
college in
The
Montreal, right?
the order of chartered accountants of Quebec. Apparently, I don't know. I don't have all the details of this. They're trying to discipline him, and it might be related to some of his public statements about Gaza and the war, which is ironic, which is funny to me because the chartered accountants organizations, like many other professional orders in Quebec, were completely bouche bée. That means mum on the issue of the Quebec government telling them they have to communicate with all their members only in French, which includes, English-speaking lawyers and accountants. They didn't have a problem with that, but they're going after Jeremy Levi because he tweeted something about Gaza. So, maybe the accountants in our audience will have more, thoughts about why that's a big issue for them.
The lawyers, the barreau has the same issue, only French
Yeah.
in the letters to
Yeah.
each other. So we're going to end here. It's a fascinating look
And
at
more
all the
coming. We're getting
goings
closer
on,
to an election season. There's going to be more coming, I promise you,
and we'll look
especially with the
forward.
Liberals imploding.
Well, I was going to say we're going to look forward to what the new mayor of Montreal may or may not do to help calm things down for Jewish people. But also, there's a big court challenge. The Supreme Court is going to hear the challenge to Bill 21 in the
Right,
new year, and
right,
so maybe it'll all be thrown out against being
right,
unconstitutional. It's
right.
very, very interesting. We'll
Well, the
be
Quebec
following that.
government expect the Quebec to use the notwithstanding clause preemptively again. I know it gets a lot of criticism from people here at home and the rest of Canada, but people want Quebec to abide by the Constitution. You got to let them use the Constitution. It's just using it preemptively it's pretty clearly seen as not in the spirit of the law, because the clause
Well,
is meant.
speak for Danielle and from Alberta, right?
Right. Well, she's taking a good cue.
Right. And Scott Moe said it too. So, I mean, Quebec's not the only one. They just were the first. It's been great to catch up with all these goings on. Our listeners will follow your work and your articles on the cjn.ca website, and we'll be in touch. Thanks a lot
Happy to
for
chat,
catching
Alan.
us up on this.
Be well.